Thank you so much for everyone for coming out on the day that the winter decided to actually kick in Sydney. So I very much appreciate it. And thank you so much because I get to share one of the things that I really love most about this collection and one of my current obsessions at the Nicholson Museum. And so I'm really excited to be able to go through that with you today. So my title of this talk is Impressions of Greece. And that's because William J Woodhouse, who was a curator here between 1903 and his death in 1937, gave a lecture the year before he died called Some Impressions of Greece. And in that lecture, he goes through exactly what it was he loved about Greece. And it's this kind of love and obsession for Greece that shows up throughout his archive and his photographic material. So today we're going to go on a little bit of a journey, and I'll explain who William Woodhouse is and why he's so important for us here at the Nicholson. Woodhouse's own travels through Greece and how he amasses over 1,800 photographs of the landscapes in his family. And then we'll talk about how the Nicholsons decided to start to try and document this collection, and my own journey following in his footsteps last year through the Peloponnese. So William J Woodhouse is this dapper-looking figure here. And throughout the archive, while over 1,500 of the images are of Greece's landscapes, people and archaeological monuments, there's nearly 300 of the glass plate negatives which also detail his family. And the family actually become really important as we study the photographs, because as his family age and his family were incredibly important to Woodhouse, and they show up over and over and over again throughout the images, as they age, we can help to use that to date our own photographs. And so we have Woodhouse sitting here with his family, with his two sisters, Hilda and Emily, his wife Eleanor, his mum Mary, his dad Richard, his daughter Liska, and his son Keith. Unfortunately, I don't know the name of this little boy here, but I think that it is Woodhouse's nephew. And the reason why I think this is because the photograph that comes immediately after this collection is one that I think everybody here kind of recognises from their own family, and I certainly do, where Woodhouse has been replaced by his brother-in-law, in which you take one family photograph with most of the people in it and then step out, and the uncle and the dad seem to always replace each other. And so this photograph here is around 1906, where his daughter is only 8 years old. And his daughter Liska here becomes really important to this story, because it's actually Liska Woodhouse who donated this collection to the Nicholson Museum in the 1980s, just shortly before her own death. And Liska was really important in the Nicholson Museum's history, because in the 1940s was actually the museum assistant here and helped people like Trendle and Stewart catalogue the collections, put things on display, and worked a lot with the material that was her dad's legacy. And so William J Woodhouse came to Australia in 1901 to take up the Professorship of Greek Studies here at the University of Sydney. And he immediately got involved in the Nicholson Museum, and in 1903 became curator of the collections. And in 1903, the Nicholson Museum looked a lot like this. We were still placed over in the Oriental Studies room. The things in the collection seemed to be quite a bit of a mix match, although there was one room that was definitely more focused on the classical collections of Greece and Rome, and there was one room that was definitely more focused on the Egyptian collections, not only just statuary, but also plaster casts and all the linen inscriptions. And what Woodhouse set out to do from the time that he got here was to really broaden the collections as large as possible. And what he, from our own archives, went and did was he supervised the move of the museum over to this space that we're in now. And you can see the ceilings and things were actually a little bit higher than they are now, and you can actually see the stained glass windows behind us. And he filled up these rooms with plaster casts of famous works of Greek sculpture and sat alongside our own mummies, and you'll notice Pediatric here, that's our favourite. And in this kind of collection, he actually stipulates in the archives that the role that he thought he was going to be and the legacy that he thought that he would leave to the Nicholson Museum was this series of plaster casts. But what I've discovered is actually it's his photographic archive that he never donated to the Nicholson Museum, that he kept as his own teaching and private collection, that has become this amazingly rich source of material for studying the Greek history, not only the archaeological past, but also modern Greek history as well. And this is just a snapshot of some of the images that we have in the collection. So Woodhouse began his travels in Greece as a young student, a Newtown student of the British School at Athens in 1891 and 92. And he showed up to excavate his first archaeological site, and that's the Theatre of Megalopolis. And Megalopolis is in the very center of the Peloponnese, and it's actually the largest Greek theatre. It would have seated nearly over 25,000 people in this theatre. And to compare, at the Paphos, which is the main theatre that everyone knows, and then it basically is preserved to the height of its full extent of the seating up to 55 rows, would only have actually seated 18,000. And in this play, you can imagine exactly how big this Megalopolis theatre would have been. And it was from this excavation that he really started his love of archaeology and material culture alongside the classical stories that he had known so well. And it is this time that he begins to photograph the Greek countryside. He comes back to Greece after 1892 in 1894 as the fellow for the British School at Athens, and over the next 3 years starts really surveying this one area up here that I've highlighted in red called Aetolia and Acharnia. And we have to remember the reason why I've given us this 1903 picture of Greece is the borders of Greece were slightly different as they are now, in that you still have a lot of Turkish occupation in the northern half of what has now become Greece and Macedonia in those regions. And so this kind of area of Greece here, we're talking about Aetolia and Acharnia, which had been really little surveyed up until basically Woodhouse set out to understand all of the different archaeological sites, but quite specifically fortifications, as well as monuments throughout the landscape. And he did so with his camera on his back, well, on his mule maybe. And that's because of this one idea that he writes in the beginning of the final publication of his work in 1897, and that is that history only attains its full value by borrowing actuality from geography and topography. And you have to remember that in the 1890s, this was a revolutionary idea in archaeology. Archaeology as a discipline was only in its very beginnings, and it was people like Woodhouse and other scholars around him that thought that to understand the full stories that we had had from the classics, that we had had from written down through Homer and then Pausanias, to understand the true history of Greece that we learned from the writings that were left over, you had to match that to the actual landscape, the actual topography, and the feeling of Greece, including its material culture. And so it's this driver, this whole slogan, that actually puts these images into their place, and this kind of explains why he was so interested and a relatively early adapter of photography in the 1890s. Throughout his book, Aetolia, published in 1897, you see some common tropes that we still use today, where people substitute for scale against a monument in the landscape. And you get a whole range of sense, but although only 200 or so images were related to Aetolia in the first place, there's all these side images that come out specifically of how he was actually going around Greece at the time, including the fact that he took his mum with him. And this is a very unusual situation, and many of you will remember this actual image from the 50 Objects, 50 Stories exhibition, because it's a story that we really like to tell, because it gives us some insight into Woodhouse and who he was and his love of family that accompanied him throughout the Greek landscape and accompanied him here to Australia. After he had published Aetolia in 1897, Woodhouse wouldn't return to Greece until 1903 and 1908. So as soon as he takes up the professorship here in Australia, he starts trying to work out how to get back to Greece. And we can see this throughout the photographs, because in those 2 years, Greek history was changing quite significantly. Archaeological sites were changing incredibly rapidly, with a whole range of different foreign institutions being set up in Athens to go and specifically excavate a whole range of different sites, one of the most famous being Delphi. And we can date some of the photographs in this archive because he actually records these sites just after the Scythian treasury had been reconstructed, and also just as the new museum was being opened in 1903. While he did kind of travel through Greece in the 1920s, it doesn't appear like we have any images from Greece at that time. And his last trip to Greece, documented in his lecture, Some Impressions of Greece, given in 1936, he laments the situation that had happened in Greece, and that Greece had been on the cusp of an industrial revolution. He laments how train travel had changed the way in which everybody saw Greece. And in fact, in this kind of fabulous quote down here, the gods sell everything at a price. And this time saving, meaning all of the different kind of new transportation devices, means that you make no contact with the countryside and its people, the real Greek people. In the buses, you are too intent upon getting what in the American language is called an eyeful of the flying scenery to have time to converse with your neighbour. All that was the true spice of travel in Greece is but a distant memory. And that's because his version of Greece was one in which you did travel on horseback, you did go in a mule, and you did really slow down the pace of where you were in Greece. And it's this one here where he refers to this quote from the same presentation, in which he refers to himself as a Rip Van Winkle, babbling of things of the days of their fathers and grandfathers, when he tried to get a mule to try and recreate his own version of Greece. That's a really interesting point. And again, we don't have many photographs or any photographs in the archive that come from this 1935 trip. So the photographs themselves really are a document of the pre-industrial revolution of Greece, just on the cusp. And I think that this image of Athens really just demonstrates this beautifully, because you can see over this side of Athens all of the build-up, and the houses had been monumentally changing and rapidly being constructed in this period. But over on the southwestern slope here, and the Agora is not too far over this side, you can actually see that there is, the main streets actually do start to peter out. And now, of course, many people have been to Greece here, I presume, know how monumental and built up Athens is. And so the significance of the archive isn't just that it's this kind of amazing documentary legacy, it has a whole range of different touchstones that we can draw upon. Woodhouse was definitely influenced by the great photographers of his time, William Stillman in particular. We know that he was definitely trying to copy some of the views that Stillman had published not too long before his first trip to Greece. But Woodhouse's bend on how he took his photographs was slightly different, and was definitely the eye of an archaeologist rather than necessarily somebody trying to promote Greek culture or trying to capture the monumentality of Greece. And you can see here that instead of having close, while he does have the standard shot of the Parthenon, he then takes a whole series of different views of the styloblade, of how the architecture is constructed. He has views not of the Temple of Athena Nike, but how the Temple of Athena Nike relates to the monumental gateway. And it's these transition images, these transection images that really show who Woodhouse was and why he was interested in photography. So there's a whole range of photographs throughout the archive that really delve into either close-ups of different types of architecture, of monuments being reconstructed, the Theatre of Epidavros being actually reconstructed while he took these photographs, as well as sites before they were even excavated. So this top of the bars that Argos will come back to, and this whole slope here is what's now the theatre and is fully uncovered. So the significance of the archive for archaeologists is really about how it documents these sites, some of the earliest photographs of these sites that are in existence. But not only that, he also records a whole range of different street scenes and markets. He also records people doing work, either unloading different loads and things like that at the Patras harbour, but also this fabulous one of the different roof tiles being laid out to dry in the sun. We have images of a whole range of different women's gardens from different village life. We have a whole range of architecture, and we'll come back to this one in a little bit. But also, we have a whole range of architecture in Greece that no longer exists anymore. Because in this time frame of Greece, up until basically the 1920s, there was a whole range of different architecture, including a whole range of series of mosques that were being dismantled across the countryside. And so it's through these early photographic collections that some of the mosques that definitely do not exist anymore, like this one at Larissa, we have this photographic evidence of that we can only find. I finally found a matching version. This one took a very long time to try and work out what it was from this fabulous postcard that was available on Pinterest. So it's through this archive that we actually document a whole series of how Greece's changing attitudes were to different, their own cultural history and the recent past. Associated with the historic photographs and these glass plates is 99 different stereographs that were also found alongside of the glass plate negatives in our attic rather recently. And I do believe that these images here and the stereographs, these 99 images, are a part of Woodhouse's collection, because the dates of the different productions, either by H.C. White & Co. or Underwood and Underwood, actually specifically date to exactly the time that Woodhouse was travelling in Greece. And what's really interesting about the stereographs is that they are able to basically capture the more stereotypical, the more photographical, like the most photographed monuments, but also more tourist shots of Greek landscapes and monuments. But equally represented in this stereograph collection alongside the glass plate negatives of Woodhouse's own photography is there's an equal representation between the ancient history and the most recent history of Greece to him. And I think that's a really kind of interesting example and shows what Woodhouse was really interested in, and that is all aspects of Greek history and culture. And so, as I said, there's over 1,800 of these glass plate negatives in the collection. And while they were donated in the 1980s, it wasn't until 2007, thanks to specific interest from Rowan Conroy, who wrote his PhD on these photographs, Elizabeth Bolin and Emma Conroy, that these images were actually scanned into our own database and that we began the process of documenting them. Now, Rowan's project was really an interesting one, and his PhD was quite specifically on the Woodhouse collection, but in the attempt to re-photograph the archive. So he actually did travel around between 2007 and 2011 in different trips to Greece himself to try and exactly recapture the photographic legacies of William J Woodhouse. But unfortunately, given that it was one man and one PhD, Rowan was able to get through several hundred of the images, but 1,800 images is a lot, and we still had a lot of the archive undocumented. And so it was decided last year that we would run a new project, and that was to use Flickr. So sorry about this crazy video, but this is how we basically launched this project, to use the photo sharing platform Flickr to release all of these images out into the public and to ask for yours and anybody's contributions to the archive that they thought that they might be able to recognize. Because some images are very recognizable, like this image of the Parthenon. Others, like this one, were less identifiable to me. And there's a whole series of images that we asked for people's help on. And so through putting them up on Flickr, people can search for our whole archive, which this is where it goes to at the moment. You can search for the Nicholson Museum. It's designed to actually enjoy and look at, but so you can search for the Nicholson Museum, you can scroll through the images, you can go to the albums that we've created on Flickr. The albums are in no particular order, but are definitely about just trying to make manageable groups of the archive, so that basically as you flick through and browse through the images, you might find something that you're interested in, so that you can delve into the collection a small amount of time and come back as much as you like. And as soon as you see something that you might want to contribute your own knowledge to, you can add that in by writing a comment into the actual program. And so through doing this, since launching this project in July last year, we've had over 500 comments on over 350 photographs within the collection. And I have been absolutely staggered by the wide range of responses that we've gotten. We've gotten a series of archaeologists getting involved in getting quite specific detail of every single layer that's represented in the images, as one would expect. We've had images of different individuals who have not only recognised the image, but have connected us to their own photographs of the sites that they had had previously. We've had people really zoom in on the images and download the largest quality to try and give us mountainscapes and landscapes. This one in particular I'm incredibly impressed by, because they've named the tiny church on the top of that hill that I didn't realise was there until I looked at her image. We've had even something for the train spotters in the audience who very much enjoy this kind of thing. There's always a train spotter who might like to be able to tell us exactly when the steam locomotive was actually created. This one was manufactured, as well as the different trains and stations. And part of the reason why I think that there are so many stations throughout the Woodhouse archive is that his dad was actually a station master. So it's very interesting that in his last lecture on Greece, that he bemoaned rail transport so much, and it's like maybe there were some other family issues going on there. But these links here take us not only to the GPS location of the coordinates that people are giving to us, and then some people are also saying, hey, I found this other image again. So it's been a really fruitful kind of collaborative project with communities. A whole range of different scenes. It recorded different village feasts and different costuming, and people have been able to identify different dances that are being performed at different times of the year. This one only came in for the annual bazaar. This one only came in at the stomping of the raisins at Paphos 3 days ago. So it's an ongoing and ever-evolving project that people are finding new things and new wonderful things in the entire time. This contribution is one of my favourites in that I was doing some research on Woodhouse and actually obviously Googling as you do, and I was trying to find something in particular about his biography, and I stumbled across a Facebook page in the Google image search that had basically reproduced some of our images, which people are wont to do, they are in the public domain, and quite specifically to try and work out and ask their own groups of people, hang on a second, how can we identify this image? And I had seen and switched over to Facebook and read in basically an entire argument taking place in Greek over to what village this possibly could be. And so of course I then responded as me saying, well, if you guys perhaps come to a consensus, please do put it on Flickr so that I can acknowledge it and acknowledge everybody's contributions. And one of the funniest things that I've been able to find is that 2 days later, this comment popped up quite specifically saying, from the discussions, there we have concluded that this must be the 1887 argument, and I thought that it was absolutely wonderful that we've been able to not only tap into individuals' love of Greece or contributions, but to be able to harness our communities that I really wasn't expecting to come out of this project, and I'm really excited that has been a really fabulous result from. So obviously we're getting lots and lots and lots of different data. And obviously we have to kind of come up with different methods for verification of this kind of information. One of the easiest methods for verification is obviously once somebody might identify a site to be able to Google and to try and find the sites and the matching material. One of the most easiest and really fabulous sites that we're using is odysseus.culture.greek, which is basically the run by the ministry and has a whole range of different archaeological sites on there and photographs of different qualities, so we can confirm archaeological sites. Others is using the fabulousness of Google Street View, in which I'm sure that many of you have used Google Street View before, but basically by plopping yourself onto the street, you can actually go up and down the street until you find the monument that you're looking for. And this one was really fabulously done in this way. However, not all sites are noticeable from Google Street View, and not all sites are going to be Googleable because the types of information we're getting is incredibly varied. And so last year I went to follow in the footsteps of Woodhouse around the Peloponnese and was lucky enough to, this is my basically map of different archaeological sites that I was hitting on the way and different paths that I took. This was done in 14 days and was nearly killed my travelling companion who thought that they were going on a holiday. And what we were able to find and what we'll be able to match was really fantastic. So my methodology while I was in the field and travelling around Greece was to be able to use my phone and download, basically sorting the images into things I thought might be represented onto my phone each day and taking that out with me so I could look through the Woodhouse archive while walking around archaeological sites, and having a GPS recorder so that when I could find a site or mark a spot, I could actually tag that image itself and be able to record that. I would then take a series of different images that either represented where the Woodhouse image was standing, but also the different monuments that are a part of the image from different angles. And sometimes this was incredibly successful, like this image at Corinth. However, by standing in exactly the same spot, and unfortunately the bathhouses at Corinth are kind of locked off in interesting ways and had me standing very precariously up on a ledge to try and take this image exactly. And also the time it was taking to try and recreate the exact image was not going to be feasible to hit as many archaeological sites as possible. So it was actually quite a challenge to be able to do that. And in some archaeological sites, like at this one, the archaeological site, especially at Mycenae, which is a major tourist attraction, have changed so much since Woodhouse's day. The ground levels have changed considerably, and just behind where my companion here is standing, exactly behind us is a giant shed, so there was absolutely no way to get the same perspective that this image actually gave us. So it's an interesting kind of basically feel for the archaeological sites in and of themselves as you travel in this fashion. However, while I was travelling around, there were still comments coming in, and Eleanor Munro, who's a fabulous volunteer here at the Nicholson Museum, has been working with me on this project throughout and was sending me information and teasing me as I was travelling around at the time. And this basically identification of the bridge came in while we were traveling, and so we changed our travel plan slightly to try and understand where this bridge was, and was able to find it. But not only find it, find all of this fabulous information that was on this rather dated label that actually explains why the bridge was important in history, and it's one of the earliest Hellenistic bridges that there are in Greece. And this is a site that isn't really well known and isn't really well studied, and it's only through being there we're able to capture this kind of information about the photograph itself. Other images are really fun and really interesting, and the Pyramid of Elleniko, which is located just here in the map, which is, if you know Greece very well, this is the town of Argos, and this is Nafplion, so this is looking out over the bay here. We were able to find the site relatively easily. It's just off the road and incredibly well signposted. But there was a lot of debate, and a lot of these sites were basically excavated in the 1880s. There's not a lot of information about the pyramid and its contents, and basically a lot of people are speculating as to exactly what it was, because it was thought originally to be a tomb, but maybe it's not a tomb. And it's not until you go there and then stand there and then take a 360 view around that you understand the exact affordability of view across the landscape, that it really informs what these things are definitely going to be used for, and that is that they were set up throughout the countryside as watchtowers. And it's not until you understand that image within the entire landscape that you can really start to identify and to start to work out what some of these archaeological sites are for. But by tracing the footsteps of Woodhouse, and we're up here, obviously some of the roads have changed considerably, especially with the paving of highways throughout Greece that's happening. But a lot of the roads haven't changed that much, especially if you go off the beaten track a little, since Woodhouse's own trip. And so by going basically along the dirt roads and along the kind of side roads, I stumbled across this fabulous church here, and I was like, oh, that's fabulous, let's just get out of the car and take a photo and have a look at what it is. And of course, then I go back through the Woodhouse archive and go, hang on a second, I know that cave, I've accidentally just been there. And so the serendipity of recognition that comes with working on a project by trying to follow in the footsteps of Woodhouse was a really wonderful experience to have. Other sites, however, I did GPS locate while I was standing around as we're driving through the countryside and see this massive fortification wall running down the mountain. And in the Woodhouse photographs, I think one of the most photographed things in there is definitely fortification walls. Woodhouse loved a wall. And if many of you know Cyclopean Greek walls, after a while they all do look pretty identical to each other, and so trying to understand and identify them is one of the big challenges of the archive, and it's only through understanding the mountainscapes around them that some of those identifications are possible. And so this is actually one that I haven't been able to match to a Woodhouse landscape, so I've taken all these locations on the wall for, not sure what yet. I'm sure we'll make it happen. And of course, because Woodhouse began his archaeological career at Megalopolis and the theatre site there, this was one of the sites that I definitely wanted to be able to visit, and was somewhere I had never been before. The theatre site today looks very similar to what it did in his photographs in the late 1800s. However, the entire site is surrounded by razor wire and is under reconstruction, so couldn't actually walk around it very freely. But of course, Megalopolis, I didn't realise, is actually placed next to the largest open-face coal mine in Europe. And if you are like me and trying to travel off the beaten path somewhat, you end up getting lost within the coal mine. So it wasn't a particularly pleasant afternoon drive. And the impact of this industrialisation on the archaeological site, this is how close the smokestacks are to the archaeological site. And so it did remind me of a lot of exactly what Woodhouse was bemoaning while he was travelling around in that last lecture, because it really does impact how you feel and how you enjoy an archaeological place. And one of my favourite moments of this whole trip was that we had, just before I left for Greece, this comment come in from Jerry telling me that he had visited this monastery just last spring, tried the rose petal jam they make here. And of course, that's tantalising enough, and sold me. And we also had not just a couple of images of the interior of the monastery, we also had a series of monks that were in the monastery at the same time. And so this is at Lake Agios Ioios at Phenios, which is just near Lake Phenios, and from the outside, it's a luscious and green, beautiful place, which translates to how the inside looks now. But what was really fantastic is I travelled with a blue guide, because I love a good blue guide, and the blue guide had basically written off this monastery as not being worth the visit. Some minor frescoes were involved. But actually the entire thing, while they are 17th century, the entire place is covered in amazing frescoes and has an amazing history and life to it itself. And while wandering around, and was invited upstairs to try the rose petal jam, found this fabulous image of the Archimandrate from the 1890s, who of course is one of our ones in the Woodhouse photographs. And so what was really fantastic is that I was discussing this very image with the monk that was there at the time, who was given the rose petal gem, and I showed him on my phone, because I had downloaded the images of the monastery, this image for him, and showed it to him, and I blew his mind. He was the most excited monk that I've ever seen, and it was a really interesting interchange, because I don't speak a lot of Greek and he did not speak a lot of English. And I was trying to explain, we were trying to exchange emails as to how I could possibly get him these images. And it wasn't until basically he turned around to me and grabbed my phone and went, Bluetooth. And Bluetooth the Woodhouse images off of my phone onto his, so that he could have these images of his monastery and his monk, which is where these images definitely belong, because this is the only image until now that the monastery had of their own history. And so one of the things, it stopped working. It stopped working, that's all right. I'm almost at the end anyway. Seriously, the next slide was my conclusion, so it's all fine. One of the things that was really special about this trip was being able to not only reconnect a lot of the images back with the places of which that they came from, being able to connect these images back to the people who might actually enjoy them the most. And I was able in Arahova, which is up near Delphi, to talk to the museum there and show them some of the images of Arahova which they were interested in. I gave them the Flickr links that they can download all of these images from and use for their own history and use for their own storytelling in that village. And it's one of the things that, given that the archive is over 1,800 images strong, and the Peloponnese is just one of the regions that he visited. In fact, I would say it's probably the least amount of photographs come from Arahova, from the Peloponnese, and the rest actually comes from central Greece and up through Larissa and Volos and places like that throughout. And so one of the fabulous things that we're going to be able to do, hopefully in the future, is to continue these different expeditions, and to hopefully myself to go back to Greece and really enjoy the Greek countryside, to understand. It's okay, it doesn't want to work, it doesn't matter. So yeah, to try and understand and place these within their context. And then this is all leading up to the fact that I'm sure that you're all aware that there's a new museum being opened in 2020, that some of these Woodhouse photographs will be able to be on display, but also for people to be able to delve into the whole collection digitally, to contribute your own knowledge, contribute your own feelings about Greece, to contribute the sites that you want to recognise, but also to just enjoy them is what the main key is. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jamie Fraser. I'm the Senior Curator at the Nicholson Museum, and it's my immense pleasure to offer a vote of thanks to Candace tonight. Before I do, just a little bit of housekeeping. I swear 10 minutes ago we were in January, but apparently we're almost in June. We've got 3 events coming up at the Nicholson in June. Our standard first Saturday of the month afternoon lecture is this Saturday. That's Dr. Nick Gordon from Academy Travel, and he's pulling at the threads of a medieval murder that happened in Florence. Florence, yes. And all the political intrigues that this event inspired. On Wednesday the 6th of June, that's this time next week, some charlatan is launching his book. That's me. I've just finished, or just had published, a book with Rutledge Press on my PhD thesis, Dolmens in the Levant, dolmens being big megalithic above-ground tomb structures. I tell you now that this book is a very expensive book designed for university libraries. We're talking a couple of $100. I can't afford it. It will be available for sale. However, if you don't want to buy it and want to know what's in it, then I'll give a lecture so you can just hear the Reader's Digest version, which frankly is probably for the very good. And then finally on Thursday the 21st of June, Dr. Carolyn Cartwright is here. Dr. Carolyn Cartwright is the Senior Research Scientist at the British Museum. She's actually coming out to the Nicholson for 3 weeks on a joint project we're running between the British and the Nicholson Museums, and she's analysing some of our wooden objects from Middle Bronze Age tombs at Jericho, sticking them under the microscope and identifying the wood species. It's a tremendously important project and I'm really excited. But something that Carolyn has been doing else at the British Museum is looking at the structure and the manufacture of the really beautiful Aztec turquoise pectorals and torques and all the various facial ornaments. And so she's putting the Aztecs under the microscope on the 21st of June. We haven't yet advertised that one. We will soon. You should have already heard about some of these if you're a friend of the Nicholson Museum, because I send out an email every couple of weeks, or Candace, and of course in our bulletin, Muse, at the back, you'll find where all these events are listed. If you are not a friend of the Nicholson Museum, then we would love for you to be a friend of the Nicholson Museum. Pick up one of these brochures on the way out, or simply talk to me, or of course take out your copy of Muse as well. Our new edition's about to be printed, coming to your letterbox in the next few weeks. Really, Candace's wonderful research and passion for the Woodhouse archive, I think, really speaks for itself. It's a real testament to the fact that a museum is not limited by its walls, but is by its collections and those connections that you can make between its collections to archaeological sites, to collections, and apparently to monks overseas in ways that really is just tremendously exciting. Candace's Flickr project has been pioneering this sort of digital application of museum archives and collections to great effect, as you've seen here, and she's really only just begun. She isn't going to be working on it in the next 6 weeks, however, because Candace is about to disappear on Monday to Serbia to participate on a new Project GLATS, which is a new excavation project run by the University of Sydney with the Archaeological Institute in Belgrade. And there she will be digging with Richard Miles, the director of the project from Sydney Uni, an imperial Roman palace, or at least palatial structure. May her trench yield some wonderful finds, and Candace, we would love for you to come back and tell us all those good things that you found. Please join me in thanking Candace Richards.